that is now active. And are we already recording, Mike?
Yes, we are. We are seeing her desktop, but
yes.
I'm not seeing the presentation yet. Is that it? Yeah,
there it is.
Perfect.
Okay, we're good. Oh, now I'm hearing.
Is your audio connected on this one?
Yeah, it's already connected.
Are you just talking over the video, or are you actually playing the video? Is this a video?
She recorded the narration.
No, this is a slide PowerPoint.
Okay, but do you have an audio file you're playing as well?
Yeah, I also have a video, a short video.
So when you share your screen, you have to put a check mark, send audio. You have to unshare and then share again, and there's a check mark there that says send audio.
Check mark?
Yeah, there's a check mark. There's two check marks: optimize for video and send audio. You have to check the send audio one.
Share computer sound, right?
Yes, that's the one.
But maybe I just show the video. I don't want to share the sound first. So can I?
Well, that's my question. Are you talking over the slides, or do you actually have a second file with an audio?
No, just the video.
Just the video. So you're talking, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't need the audio then. That's fine. Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to pretend that none of that happened. You all met Marco Polo, so welcome to our live stream of the thesis presentation from Ngan Phan. Marco, as you've just met a moment ago, is our graduate director, so you met him. I'd like to also welcome two guests that we have today, in addition to the Defense Committee. And in no particular order, this is the order that I've been given. The first guest is Peter Yeadon from Rhode Island School of Design. He's a professor of industrial design. He's also the founder of a New York-based practice called the Yeadon Space Agency. He's Canadian. He's one of us. He's a graduate of Dalhousie University School of Architecture, and was a recipient of the Canada Prix de Rome in 1999. And he's known for his pioneering research in new applications for advanced materials in architecture and design, and has received numerous awards for his work and frequently lectures at universities and conferences on the topic of materials-driven innovations. Yeadon's projects are also routinely featured in publications and exhibitions around the world. At RISD, he has taught design studio on advanced materials since 2003, and previously had taught at Cornell University as well as the University of Toronto. So thank you for giving your time to us, Peter, and welcome.
Thank you.
Our second guest is Carol Phillips, who is in Toronto. She's a partner at Moriyama Teshima Architects, one of the city's best architecture firms, in my opinion. And she's led some of the firm's most valued civic, cultural, and educational buildings. She brings a passionate drive for powerful and graceful architectural solutions developed over 20 years of working in Canada and abroad. Carol is currently partner in charge on the George Brown College Arbor Tall Wood Building project. And this is done in partnership with Acton Austria Architects, and Moriyama Teshima is the architect of record in the city. Known for her exceptional presentation skills and ability to gain broad support for her projects, Carol is adept at stakeholders engagement and promoting designs in ways that result in wide-scale consensus. A fellow of the RAIC, her complete design and collaborative skills allow her to drive and lead every phase of a building project, while her exceptional and versatile design leadership drives through the vision for designs of varying building programs, reinforcing the principles of generous, inspiring spaces that serve their communities. So again, as well too, Carol, welcome to our thesis presentation. And hope you guys make yourself as comfortable as you possibly can. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the supervisor, Vincent Hui, Professor Vincent Hui, who has been acting as the supervisor, and the second reader is Jason Ramilson, who is with Verizon, but in a slightly different capacity as a staff member. But he has a master's degree in architecture, equally qualified. And I'm the departmental rep, and my job is to welcome people and be the bad guy, Ngan. So you have 20 minutes to do your presentation. So those are the only rules that I have for you. And at the 15-minute mark, I will beep you. And then we have about 20 minutes for questions and answers. And then the rest of the time leading up to 1 o'clock, we will be asking you to leave. And then we will be deliberating and deciding on the outcome of this presentation. So you have it. You have the screen, Nan. Go ahead.
So welcome to my thesis defense. The title is An Architectural Dialogue Between Light and Form, Biomimetic Form Fighting in Response to Daylight. Here's the topic I will discuss, starting with the natural light in architecture, and then with multifunctional translucency to the mediating zone, the parallel development between biomimetic design and architectural envelope, and then to air architecture. At this middle point of air architecture, I transfer all of them and theoretical background into making prototype and digital designs, and then I will wrap up the thesis with a conclusion. Natural light in architecture, the experience of changes. Architecture is a learned game, correct and magnificence of forms assembled in light. Light is the soul of architecture, while natural light is a gift of nature. It connects both nature and humans. Beyond exposing things to view and feel, light animates architectural forms and enriches human perception about physical world through different stories may tell. It means light is always changing. It reveals in architecture a dynamic visual affinity where our experience is constantly re-examined while the ambient environment changes during the day or the season. Therefore, it becomes essential to understand how architecture is enhanced and transformed over time by the dynamic changes of daylight. We are now living in the era of technology where we have exceptional ability to create almost random architectural forms. But while we're creating more high-density cities, architecture ends up with more solid box-like forms covered with glass, regardless of the concern of locality or visual comfort. Glass envelope reveal modernist desire for boundary dissolution because glass is associated with transparency. Like in Anthony Violet's words, modernity has been haunted by a myth of transparency of the self to nature, of the self to other, and of all selves to society. There is always a cognitive incongruence in our perception about class envelope. Although we believe in the pure transparency of class, what we observe daily results from its varied colors, texture, and patterns under dynamic changes of the surrounding environment. These constituents and their function have been switched architectural envelopes from purely transparency to translucency. This will bring us to the next topic of multifunctional translucency. Translucency is generated by floated or tinted glass, tend to hinder visual penetration of a space. Chernobyl once said that the poetry of haze and evanescence of translucency renders superfluous the reading of solid volumes. It is similar to the poetic opaque veil which create the design for the observer to imagine and interpret the concealed beauty. The layer composition that generate the envelope translucency have evolved from single panel curtain wall to coated glass, louver screen, and then to double skin facade to deal with the old-time concerns of glare and heat gain in multi-story building. Double skin facade with wider thermal corridor have proved that the evolution of the translucent envelopes concentrate on increasingly enhance the thermal performance of the air cavity which function as a mediating zone between the exterior and interior. This is not just about the daylighting function, but the air barrier bring together the insulation function and transform the original function of an envelope into a multifunctional translucency. So let's explore this topic of the mediating zone for insulation more fully. It is more straightforward to look for inspiration from plants' realm for daylighting design, because sunlight's requirement for plants can deliver usable principle for daylight challenges in architecture. Deep leaf epidermis contain many minuscule pores, namely stomata, that can open and close according to temperature and light changes. Understand the microstructure and multi-layer leaf epidermis. We realize that leaves do not expose the stomata directly to the environment. There is a buffer zone located merely at the external perimeter of the stomata. This buffer zone, known as the boundary layer, creates a microclimate of still air surrounding the outer surface of the leaves. A higher volume of the boundary layer helps increase the air barrier of insulation, while greater surface area of the boundary layer improves photosynthesis because it exposes the surface area more to sunlight. A thin boundary layer can develop into trichomes, or roughly called leaf hairs. They increase light reflection, regulate temperature, and decrease water loss from leaves. Different species may develop glandular trichomes with heads to reflect light deeper, similar to light cells in double skin facade. The more extreme type is when trichomes take spherical shape to form into small bubbles to maximize the surface area exposing to sunlight. The concave and convex surface of a luminous mass suggests a principle that it can transform the cells that receive sunlight directly to a secondary source of sunlight and reflects to its neighboring cells. The trichome principle can suggest very valuable lesson for architectural envelope. It uses the pressure to inflate the spherical cells, but for simultaneously, the trichome are certainly beside increasing the surface area, if architectural envelope can adjust their volume and translucency simultaneously as trichome, they are certainly arriving at an organic and multifunctional form that can respond to daylight fluctuation while balancing thermal performance. Unlike plants using water to inflate their epidermis structure, fluid mechanic is not very suitable for the scale of the architectural building. Air is lighter and very compressible. Therefore, the experiment with it is safer than with water is promising to result in an adaptive system that can work alongside with people without creating any sort of damage. The interpretation and application of Planck's principle to architecture in this thesis will switch to pneumatic mechanisms to achieve the inflatable forms. The field of architecture has tested the biomimetic functionality of air for centuries. A single and large individual of any pneumatics form is very fragile and unstable under external pressure and easily end up with undesirable deformation. But when two bubbles of an equal size meet, they will ultimately construct a flat common wall to strengthen the construction. Therefore, organic makes use of this principle to construct series of smaller units to support each other. Similar to the Spittelberg form, this is a series of bubbles that can create a center that is more stable for the Spittelberg with, and also creating enough sunlight for the living condition. Working on a right pattern, the variation of the local unit will be able to alter and control their global form. This result can only be achieved through the material interaction because material interaction is always subtle, potential, and relational on this way, expressing emergent and hybrid formation with other material or matters. The three main streams of bio-inspiration, materiality, and functionality come together, and it induces a new form that is continuous, pattern-based, elastic, and translucency variable in order to achieve daylighting goal. So now we come to the idea of the pattern of local control system with material integration through prototyping. First, I experiment with hard plastic. With the pattern of the bubble, a different smaller bubble can create an immersion curvature in the pneumatic plastic seat. But with this material property, the pneumatic cannot vary translucency to daylight. It's also similar to the ETFE material, when pneumatic units of this type can only be inflated one way, or they will be saggy when deflating. The project pushes the limit of the hard plastic to work a softer and more flexible material of the same rubber family, which resemble the physical performance of organic tissue in many ways. Through molding and casting process, silicone layers of different measure can merge and create uniformity. Like in this experiment, the thicker skeleton is made of stronger and harder silicone and also thicker layer, whereas the thinner layer will become the inflation part that can vary the translucency. Also, when the system is inflated, it creates an immersion curvature according to the distribution of air and the pattern layout. The inflation process so that unlike ETFE, we cannot vary the translucency on its surface. Silicon can inflate and contact without changing the original setup of the pattern. I will show you a short video of making to show the quality of the material that can be transformed to architectural design. The selected pattern is defined by the various functions of the shading system inherently integrated into architectural envelopes. This composition on the uniform envelope displays a gradient of translucency and inflation, making a functional self-shading and self-regulating system for daylighting. For example, the top part of the silicone with high translucency allows for light deeper into interior. It's like the light shell on the top of the curtain wall that let the light deep.
Did Ngan freeze out?
As a window blind. This part can also be transferred into more transparent part to let the occupant connect to the view to the nature. Besides varying the air cavity, the emergent curvature from the pneumatic pattern generates interesting transformation of the space behind it. The function of building in the first place is to shelter occupants who have needs and wishes to be comfortable. People like natural light more than artificial light and prefer to work in daylight and choose to locate close to a window. Therefore, daylight is central to provide a pleasant visual environment, contribute to a feeling of well-being. Office workers in big cities form a large percentage of healthcare workforce in the productive world, creating healthy environments that will suitably accommodate this human resource will help the society function at sustainable levels.
You have 5 minutes.
The building process. The building project has the location in Toronto. In high-density metropolis such as Toronto, new high-rise and deep floor plan buildings simply occupy the entire site to maximize building area. Architectural building in the city like this have been suppressed to become mundane. The site is located at a place where poorly located and designed tall building physically, visually overwhelm adjacent streets. They have already blocked sunlight views of the sky from 3 directions, except for the south direction, looking towards St. James Park. By accessing to Toronto data, weather data, sunlight, sun orientation, the massing process transformed from a glass fog to a thermal corridor for a basic double skin facade. But after that, I developed a script for daylighting evaluation with Grasshopper and Diva. This includes 2 parts. The first part will be daylight simulation with the value of calculation. This will fuel into Grasshopper inflation process. The calculation is based on the grid of 1200 millimeter. It's also agreed with the size of the pneumatic cells. In different illuminant results display the inflation variation of the south envelope on a typical working floor with 300 lux required for visual comfort of the interior. The inflation process operates as a feedback loop where any current inflation result become input data for the coming transformation of the pneumatic envelope. The dynamics of the translucent and surface undulation of both interior and exterior enrich the user experience by incorporating motion into architecture. The design project gives occupants another dimension by which to interact with their surroundings. In working environment where privacy and daylight demand often intersect, high translucency material are applied at the view elevation to allow occupants the opportunity to see the beautiful view from St. James Park. Although illuminism is a measure suitable for visible light falling on a surface, but it's not applied for the glare evaluation. So with the rendering simulation combined with the illumination calculation, the comparison results show that the the observer experience can be better improved, and the comparison set under intermediate sky condition across the year to create a holistic analysis to changing effects of contrast and light variation through the series of architectural space. It showed that the light under the silicon envelope can become diffuse and also become a secondary light source for the overall space. At this point, there aren't any electrical feature in this space, and what we are seeing is the elemental quality of natural daylight. Unlike floor-to-floor class that gives away all secrets, it creates human experience about space. The claims of penetration generated by the flexible and translucent envelope reinforces the daylight necessity for the insight and the ambiguity for the observers viewing from the outside. The translucent complexity allows multiple understanding of what a space can be. The architectural facade can receive and process both external and internal statistics to work on the inflation movements that in return cater to the people well-being inside. It shows that architectural envelopes can autonomously grow from their local conditions. The use of cable and active tendon or muscle support the inflation and deflating movement. It also allows as much flexibility for the system as possible. As much flexibility for the system as possible, albeit anchoring to the technicality of the basic building. In conclusion, the design project does not look for an ultimately good envelope, but an architecture that helps redefine where we stand. It is a journey of moving away from linear design thinking to enable greater possibility for form finding through the integration of materiality. The biomimetic envelope can follow the rhythm of natural light and can transform from spring to summer, from sunrise to sunset. It creates liveliness with the meaning of locality. It is not necessarily causality and may not have a direct relationship with our mood that is measurable. It may be complex, subjective, and may happen over time and with use. Contemporary architects and researchers inspired by this thesis may conduct further experiment on materials for formation through the complex prototypes. When placed into operation, they may continue to develop interface options by seeing how users interact with the daylight parameters provided. With personal feedback, occupants will be contributing to the dynamic changing of the architectural forms. So this is the end of my thesis. I will be happy to see any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ngan. Do you mind just removing the screen share for a moment?
Stop the screen share.
Yeah, for a moment. Yeah, if you do not mind doing that. I just like to ask our guests and of course Vince and Jason if there are any questions for clarification from the presentation, the video, as well as her book before we start the defense. Okay, seems like we are good. Okay, so so we are ready to do the defense, and because I didn't introduce Carol first, she gets to be the first one out with your comments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it was really, really interesting exploration into the skin of a building and as it relates to daylight harvesting and reduction of glare and optimization of daylight into buildings, especially coming up with a sort of innovative sort of form, which is in an urban context, often so much of what is left for the design exploration and the sort of visual expression of the building. So I want to congratulate you, first of all, in what seems to be a really interesting exploration into material development that is being driven from experience. I did have a little bit of a question there that I'd like to speak to, and it has to do with, you know, how much actual vision glass, how much actual visible penetration that you would have through a facade that you are proposing, because I see a sort of modulation of the daylight to give a kind of even light distribution within, but actual views out, I'm a little uncertain as to what you envision in a skin like this.
So the light that need to be get inside the space need to be dependent on the visual comfort of the occupants. I set the calculation for the threshold of 300 lux for the requirement of specific task performance of the occupant inside the office building. But the office building with many kind of activities can have their own required illuminance that can be set up for the threshold of the calculation. And during the function of the inflation, the people that require more fluctuation of their own in illumination, they can change that threshold, and the whole architectural envelope can transform according to that demand.
Yeah, I think that is really well articulated in your thesis and your exploration, that your inside environment is you're able to modulate it, you're able to manipulate it, and you are able to sort of have increased or decreased light penetration depending on how you kind of grow this envelope. I guess I'm still uncertain as to the views out, and so I'll just speak to that with respect to the site and location of this proposed design project, which has exposure to St. James Park. So the urban context is one where you actually have a generosity of view. It's a very active park. It's you know, my office is actually right there, and many times I'm able to be in buildings that look into that park and understand, you know, whether it's dog walkers or urban protests or theater, or just the park changing in the seasons. There is that relationship to actually the visual relationship to the park. And so I suppose one of the things that I'm wondering about is the selection of the site for the exploration, given that it seems still, and I may be misinterpreting the thesis, it seems still that this proposal gives you a sort of very diffuse light environment, which would be beautiful, but the delivery of views then needs to be incorporated, I think, into any design proposal. I also think that perhaps while you've chosen an office environment as the one to explore this in this system in, perhaps there are different building typologies where this would really be a fantastic solution or consideration. I'm thinking about spaces where you really want to reduce glare, spaces where you really want to enhance light when there is none. And I'm thinking about spaces like gymnasiums or swimming pools, where you're actually looking to reduce actual glare, but bring that sense of luminosity into the spaces. And I think that maybe the typology of the office is ambitious, but there is the other aspect of when you're spending 8 hours a day in a place, or however that actually looks post-COVID, I have no idea. But nevertheless, that access to actual visual transparent view is something that's incredibly important to a wellness environment for your workday. Whereas maybe if you were looking at a different typology where it was kind of event specific, whether it was a space of worship, whether it was a pool or gymnasium where the activity is sort of very inward focused and active, but you're trying to bring all that light in. I think that might be an application that you might consider as well. And I also think that there's tremendous potential for this sort of what I would call the liminal zone between this external facade and the interior envelope of the building, which is really the limit of the building, to maybe even see how this translates to extending the outdoor space, even in an office environment. Could you occupy those spaces? What's the temperature like in there? What's the light quality in there? That maybe you could actually see those as 3-season kind of rooms in between that, in that generous skin. So I limit my comments to that, so that Peter can speak and we can have a general conversation.
Thank you, Carol. Peter?
Hi, Ngan, how are you?
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for inviting me to your review. I was really excited about this study because it's really closely aligned with my own interests in materials-driven research and design. So I really enjoyed the in-depth study that you did for your thesis on many levels. Actually, it's pretty rich as a study, and we could enter it in different ways, right? Yeah, you've thought about how living organisms, for example, can inform your study through biomimicry. You've thought about material properties and light properties and how those two interact, and how the interplay of light with materials might influence occupational spaces or how you perceive things in spaces. You thought about the program and the volume and the site. It's a lot to take on in a thesis. But I'm mostly interested in how the materials informed your study, personally, and then how that has an impact on the other areas. So I think just generally the silicone was a great medium for you to explore. It has a number of delightful attributes which you can take advantage of and discovered in your own research, of course. The ability to cast into thick things and thin things, which you can stretch, and their transparency and translucency vary, along with their ability to manage thermal energy that might pass through that wall. The prototypes were really great. As a model, I think they were useful. It seemed like you could do a lot of things with that material if you think about, for example, modifying the patterns or modifying the thickness as you demonstrated, but also doping it with other materials. So adding impurities to it to change its properties, its stiffness, for example, that could be a very exciting avenue for you, whether those things might cause it to conduct electricity, for example, or might cause it to change color in response to temperature, like thermochromics, for example. Or you might think about just other options for color as well, which can influence the amount of heat that a material absorbs, for example. And so I think there's a lot there for you to kind of think about in the future, in terms of just variability, depending on what the anticipated outcome needs to be, right? So for you, it seems like you're largely excited about the light properties and the thermal properties, and obviously you're working with a facade, so that's a concern. And you start out right at the beginning talking about light. And I was happy you mentioned the spittle bug, because it seemed like the living organisms, they were like a starting point, but you smartly departed from them and didn't get too wrapped up in what lessons you might learn from them. I really liked in your paper that you got onto soft robotics, for example, pneumatics and soft robotics, which are used to emulate, in some instances, the sort of gentle touch of a human, for example, to pick fruit off a tree with a similar pneumatic silicone system. So, and it's really about emulating an action or behavior. So for the spittle bug, it's about creating that relationship to the environment they're in that you were most interested in, it seemed, rather than the organism itself. So how they could, form something, mediate between what their bodies are experiencing and the environment they're in. So that, I thought that was really useful as well. I would agree with Carol that I was a little surprised that you chose the office. It's like, wow, this material in the facade has such great possibilities, and also that the building was kind of tiny. It's like a tiny, just really small building. If you think of contemporary buildings in cities, office buildings, they're often, they often have commercial areas and sometimes hotels and condos integrated into that. You might have done better with a 70 or 100-story building, that has clearly north, south, east, west dynamics going on, rather than a tiny infill building that has 24-foot rooms. But I do think that the impact of the facade and the interior is very exciting as well, which Carol had mentioned to think about. How does that change the experience of people inside? And you mentioned that in your paper, that you're interested in what people who occupy the spaces experience and how that might contribute to the health of that environment. So that's great. That's super important, I think, as you think about how this facade might change that experience. I'm not sure personally that it's good to tie it to any one particular set of criteria's inputs. If you think about people in office buildings, they also like to kind of stare outside. So there might be, if you're like on the 80th floor or something, one of the tall office buildings, it's like a great view sometimes. So you might want to be able to see outside occasionally and change your facade, right? For example, your system's incredibly responsive. As someone walks toward the facade, it could become more transparent, so the view appears. And as they move away from it, it becomes more translucent again. I don't know, but I'm just not sure that the thermal regulation is the most exciting thing you could do with that material system. I think you've got a lot of options there.
So I choose office for design projects because with urban conditions, an office like this is very tight and very ambitious. So if I can fulfill all of the requirements for this ambitious, for these challenges, I can also have a more easier task for other types of building. Because also going with urban conditions, it's only about like tall buildings and about like offices with open floor plan that is also very deep and high. So if the pneumatic facade can be provided for such a like very difficult condition, it will also become a very promising products, promising designs of architecture for the future of different types of buildings. Yeah. And you also mentioned about the color, the properties, how can silicon can be expand, can be experiment more, texture, color, property can be stronger or can be more elastic. I already have research and do more prototype about that, but the color, making the silicon more translucent. So it will reduce the view penetration. So I try with the silicon that is as much clear as possible. And at the view at the view size for the people to view outside the park can be applied more transparent silicone. And even though it's not fully inflated, it can also be viewed through into the park.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, that response, because you, in your response, you remind me of your own quote from Bidler about being haunted by the myth of transparency, right? Like you're trying to uniformly put your facade over whatever outside surface area you have so it can be transparent. And all I'm suggesting is that maybe if you had a more diverse mixed use project that's much larger, you would have areas that just never inflate, strategically so. Or maybe on the north, you don't necessarily want to inflate some parts because it increases surface area, which means you have more thermal conductivity. You have a thinner wall and more surface area exposed to the cold or the hot. So with a more diverse program, I think you'd be able to really emphasize all the range of possibilities potentially, right? Like you think about high rises today with movie theaters in them, for example. Well, those are probably dead space types now, but anyway, they're like buildings they have shopping malls and something. Office, it's quite rare in my experience now just to have a standalone office building one type in a city of a high-rise scale. Anyway, I think it'll be a great way to think about the rich possibilities for your facade and illustrate it.
Okay, I need to be mindful of time. So Jason and Vince, can you share 5 minutes between the two of you?
I'll defer to second reader first because I'm the one that cleans up. So go ahead,
Okay.
Jason.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Ngan. I just want to commend you on your presentation. I thought this was one of the best and most succinct and most organized presentations you've had. So thank you for that. I feel like I want to talk about the control of the system again, and just branching off of what Carol and Peter were talking about. I think when you demonstrate or illustrate your grasshopper script, it would be extremely important and beneficial to the thesis to showcase that duality of someone that wants full sunlight and someone that doesn't want any sunlight in their working space in the exact same floor plan. And to be able to demonstrate that there is that level of control within a singular space. And so that could take the form of a rendering or another Diva simulation. And I think that aspect would really enrich the possibilities of the facade or showcasing the possibilities of the facade. And so while we chose an office building, it may not necessarily take the form of program, but for the case of your thesis, it should be an individual aspect. So 2 individuals sitting at opposite sides of the office that would normally use potentially a blind system or louvers or whatever it might be to control their space. And so I think inserting that pretty much right after that grasshopper script to demonstrate, personal preference, or if you want to take it a step further to the programmatic preference, I don't think you need to, but the personal preference should definitely be there. And perhaps you even talk about activities in the office. So not necessarily like a completely different program, but maybe there's a glazed in boardroom at the back of the floor plate. And those people are doing a presentation versus the people at the very front of the facade. And I think that might enrich that aspect.
Yeah, just really quick in closing. I agree with a lot of the comments that were made by all the guest reviewers, and thank you very much for them. Jason, for sure, that inclusion will definitely be there because I think I agree that there is that robustness that's not quite demonstrated. The other thing that I think that was presented in this presentation that wasn't really articulated in the book and comes even to the committee members as a little bit new, was this the level of development. We understood the physical prototyping in a clear way, but I think that, as Jason mentioned, the description of your digital prototyping would have also been really useful because I think there's as much effort in there, and certainly folks like I know Peter's had a lot of experience with this in his portfolio of work, but I think that there's a lot of credit that you kind of throw under the rug in the kind of digital prototyping that was done in that particular exercise. So I think Yutong, is that cool for quick?
That's very cool. Thank you so much. I'm going to kind of somewhat forego my comments other than just bringing back what Carol raised just now, Ngan. about views. Not once did we actually saw the opportunity of you actually showing that down to the park. And Peter's comment about when you approach the facade, it actually can react to you approaching and opening things up and stuff like that. So that I felt there was a little bit of a lost opportunity, but maybe that wasn't something that you were hoping to explore for this particular thesis. So I'm just echoing whatever that has been raised. So on that note, I'm just gonna maybe just have 1 minute left for any one last question that is urgently required to be asked. And if not, then we will have to. Oh, Carol, go ahead.
It's not a question. It's more of a comment because you know, when you go off first, you're not sure necessarily if you've said everything that you need to say. But I want to say that this is really strong work, and that you know, as the conversation has gone on, I can imagine this sort of at different scales and can be applied to different solutions. You know, in the park that you're right next to, St. James Park, there's a huge issue of homelessness. You can imagine this working for, you know, temporary solutions. It could work for the individual to resolve the tent cities you see around and give a sense of privacy, but a sense of light. It could work at the scale of stadia. So I think that this is a really strong idea about exploring a light modulating sort of system. That has tons of potential, which is always indicative of strong thesis work. Like it can go very many different ways.
I absolutely agree. I just want to congratulate you, Ngan, on your successful thesis, and I hope you continue to do these materials experiments and are really fascinated by stuff and how it can turn into architecture and change architecture.
Yeah.
So good luck with that in your future career.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Vince. Ngan, if it's okay with Marco, can we ask you to log off, and that will give us about 5 minutes to deliberate.
Thank you.
And you can all say goodbye. She's not going to come back.
Thank you, Nan.
Okay, bye on.
Bye.
I'll talk to you later.
Thanks,
Okay,
Nan.
I'll send an invite later. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Do we stay on?
Yes,
Yep.
yes.